The fork hit the tile just as the man called me captain loud enough to silence the whole diner. Name's Irene 63 Waitress by habit, Ghost by accident. Steam curled off his coffee the same way it once did off my Echo 9 badge, the one tucked right under my collar. Ever met someone who wasn't supposed to exist? Every Tuesday morning at the Old Whistle Cafe smelled like burnt toast, lukewarm coffee, and stories that never quite ended. To most, Irene Mallory was just another apron-wearing fixture in the corner booth. She moved through the morning like the second hand on the cafe's old clock, quiet, precise, and unnoticed unless you were really looking. Her hands spotted gently with age and heat polished from decades of dishwater-folded napkins in threes, not twos, like everyone else. She placed them perfectly fanned beside chipped white mugs before the regulars even sat down. Outside the town of Redwood Hollow stirred under a sheet of early frost. The bell over the cafe door clinked as Darlene kicked it open with a hip, carrying in a box of eggs and cursing the chill. She tossed her menthol pack on the counter and nodded toward Irene without a word. Oldies crackled from the radio, something about a girl in the summer of '69. The booths slowly filled. Mrs. Pearl, hunched in a powder blue coat, took her spot by the window and pulled a crossword from her purse. She didn't order any more, just nodded once, and Irene knew it meant weak coffee, 2 sugars. At the corner table, Chet Ramsey plopped down with the force of a collapsing shed. "Guess what I almost caught this weekend?" he hollered. Darlene, without looking up, muttered, "Let me guess. Respect for women." Laughter spilled out from the kitchen. Irene's smile barely flickered as she topped off Mrs. Pearl's mug, the pot balanced gracefully on 2 fingers. She moved toward the back table where Eli sat, as he did every Tuesday, a layer of snow on his shoulders from the walk over. He wore 2 coats and fingerless gloves, his beard the color of iron. "Warm plate today?" she said, not quite a question. Eli nodded. She placed the breakfast eggs toast, a sliver of sausage, and folded a cloth napkin beside his fork. He didn't thank her. He never did. But his eyes lifted for a second, and that was enough. Near the register, Irene adjusted a small American flag that leaned awkwardly in its stand. It tilted east, always east. Above it, the local bulletin board had new flyers, the annual church bake sale, a flag retirement ceremony, a lost tabby named Captain Mittens. "Hey," Irene Chet called between bites. "You ever work for the CIA or something? The way you move stealthy." Irene paused, one hand hovering over the coffee pot, then gave a slow, polite smile. "She won't tell you," Darlene chimed from the grill, "but I've seen her dodge more falling spatulas than a ninja in combat boots." The doorbell jingled again. Cold air rolled in, followed by a man in a faded Marine Corps jacket. His posture was too straight for someone his age, early 60s maybe, with a jawline like carved stone and eyes that scanned the room in calculated arcs. He didn't speak for a while, just stepped to the counter and removed his cap. "Black coffee. And whatever's hot." Irene moved automatically, setting a mug beneath the drip. But as she passed the coffee across the counter, the man's eyes locked onto hers, with a steadiness that quieted the sizzle from the grill and the scrape of forks on plates. "You always opened early, didn't you?" Captain Irene freezes. Darlene looks up. Chet drops his fork. The coffee keeps pouring. The last time someone called her captain, there were no walls, only dirt and the sound of incoming fire. Here it was eggs and chatter until now. The murmur of the cafe resumed, but it felt thinner somehow, like someone had turned down the bass on the world. Irene turned away from the man Grant, his name whispered by Mrs. Pearl, as he stepped out and returned to her station by the coffee pot. She didn't say a word, didn't offer a shrug or a smile. She refilled Eli's mug. He nodded slowly, eyes studying her now, not like a friend, but like someone reading a familiar story written in a new language. The bell jingled with the departure of the Marine. Irene didn't watch him go. Darlene did. "He sure knew your name," the cook said from the pass-through, chewing thoughtfully on the corner of her pen. "Weird coincidence, huh?" Irene slid a saucer beneath a mug, the motion practiced but now slightly stiff. "People say things." "Uh-huh. People also usually say no or, 'I don't know what you mean.' You didn't say either." Outside, the wind howled. It shook the windows in their old wooden frames. Inside, it was warmer than it had any right to be. Ceramic mugs steaming on tables, maple syrup soaking into pancakes, heat rising gently from the old cast-iron griddle. But none of it reached Irene's shoulders, which held tension like a question never asked. From the far booth, Chet rambled louder than usual. "So I told the guy at the bait shop if that catfish was any smarter, it'd be running for city council." Nobody laughed. Mrs. Pearl furrowed her brow at a crossword clue. 12 across, she muttered. Wartime deception. 4 letters. Lies, Irene murmured under her breath, already halfway to the kitchen. In the back, Darlene leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You're going to tell me that man doesn't know you?" Irene opened the fridge. "It's complicated. I got time. It's also classified." There was silence heavy like the winter air waiting just beyond the walls. Darlene blinked. "That's a weird joke." "It wasn't." Darlene stared a beat longer, then turned away, muttering something about burnt toast. Back in the dining room, a small television bolted into the corner played a grainy daytime segment. A young reporter spoke in hushed tones. "This week's special tribute honors soldiers of Echo 9, an elite recon group whose records remain largely sealed even today." The image flickered to black and white photos, faces half in shadow unit patches stitched crookedly onto jackets. The audio dipped in and out. Irene didn't look up. But Eli did. He tilted his head toward the TV, then toward Irene, then back again. The slow connection forming behind his eyes. A toddler somewhere dropped a spoon. A burst of laughter came from 2 teenagers passing outside. The cafe, alive as ever, now felt like it had a hidden room no one knew existed just behind Irene's silence. She moved to clear table 4, where the napkin holder sat askew. As she bent to grab a fallen fork beneath the booth, her collar shifted. It was only for a second, but that second was enough. A small silver insignia peeked from beneath the fold of her uniform, a triangle nested in a circle worn smooth with time and thumb rubs. It shimmered briefly in the sunbeam slanting through the blinds. Across the room, Grant, who had returned quietly without triggering the doorbell just to pay again, froze mid-step. His eyes locked on the symbol. For a moment, nothing moved. He stepped forward slowly, carefully, like approaching a live fuse. "That's an Echo 9 badge. We don't forget those." Irene looks up, voice low. "Then I guess you already know what not to ask." There were always stories about soldiers who vanished from the system ghosts with medals no one could pin. Turns out one had been pouring their coffee for years. By late afternoon, the sun had started leaning in low through the west-facing windows, drawing long amber bars across the tiled floor of the old Whistle Cafe. The chatter was quieter now, broken up by the occasional clink of silverware or hum from the overhead heater. The bell above the door barely made a sound when it jingled. Grant had stayed. He sat at the back booth now, a binder thick with age and scribbled tabs open in front of him. The kind of thing built over decades, not with technology, but with memory paper and wariness. His reading glasses rested halfway down his nose, and one calloused finger traced a line of blacked-out military print like a priest following sacred text. Darlene hovered near the hallway leading to the restrooms. Lining the walls were old photos, blurry sun-bleached group shots from county parades and Veterans Day breakfasts. She'd passed by them 100 times, but today her eyes searched differently. She paused in front of a frame from 1978, a town gathering flags, waving a school marching band frozen mid-step. In the lower right corner was a woman in uniform, face angled just enough to recognize the line of Irene's jaw. Back at the counter, Irene moved a little slower than usual. Not from fatigue, though the years sometimes pressed down, but from something else. Resignation, maybe? Or the knowledge that silence could no longer hold. Eli was sipping coffee like it was soup, cupping the mug with both hands. His gaze flicked between Irene and Grant. When she passed by, he reached gently and touched her wrist. "Still remember that night," he said, voice gravelly. "Cold. Park bench. My ribs were cracked. Thought I was gonna freeze through." Irene looked at him, startled. "Eli, you came by. Didn't say a word. Left a blanket, a sandwich, taped a $20 bill to the thermos lid." He smiled faintly. No one ever did that before. She didn't reply, just gave a soft pat to his shoulder and returned to her station. A young couple walked in, bundled up, cheeks pink from the wind. They took a booth by the front, exchanging glances as they noticed the odd hush around the room. The girl leaned in, whispering, "Is this place always so solemn?" The boy glanced at Grant's binder, the framed photos, the curious silence from the older patrons. Then subtly he slipped out his phone and typed, "Echo 9 Military Unit." Behind the counter, Darlene approached Grant's eyes on the open folder. "What's that you're reading?" He didn't look up. "Redacted Field Report, 1982, Northern Corridor. A female Echo 9 officer disobeyed direct orders. Extracted a trapped unit, 12 souls. Saved every one of them. Then she vanished." Darlene folded her arms. "Let me guess. The brass buried it." Grant nodded. "Echo 9 didn't get paperwork. They got shadows." She scoffed, looked toward the kitchen. "Figures." Later, while wiping down tables, Darlene cornered Irene again. "So that report he's got that you—" Irene placed a spoon next to a slice of pie. "I didn't do it for records." Darlene blinked. "That's not a denial." "It's not a confession either," Irene said, gently, eyes tired but steady. In the corner, Mrs. Pearl dug into her tote bag and pulled out an old scrapbook. "My Herald kept clippings," she said, flipping pages with spotted fingers. "Always said someday we'd want to remember the ones they tried to forget." She stopped on a yellowed page. "Echo 9, it read in careful type. The photo below showed a row of helmets on a tarmac. Names were handwritten beside each except the last, where only 2 letters remained. I.M. I kept it because of the name, Mrs. Pearl said, looking toward Irene. Didn't know it meant anything. No one spoke for a few moments. Finally, Darlene walked to the community board near the door. She pulled a sticky note from her apron and scribbled something. Then she pinned it beside the Lost Cat flyer and bake sale poster. She drew a small triangle inside a circle and beneath it wrote, "Sometimes heroes work the morning shift." A gust of wind pushed open the door before the bell could ring properly. Everyone turned. A woman in a crisp navy blue coat stepped in her shoes, clicking softly against the tile. She held a manila envelope, her expression composed but urgent. "Ms. Mallory, we've been trying to find you." The envelope had been sealed in 2008, redirected 4 times, and returned once until it landed here in her hands in a town that forgot how to ask questions. Outside, the street lamps buzzed like sleepy bees, their yellow halos flickering against the sidewalk. Inside, the Old Whistle Cafe, the day had ended. The chairs were flipped upside down on the tables, the coffee machine wiped and silenced. The open sign rested backward against the window, and the radio had long since been turned off. At the center booth, normally reserved for birthday cakes or overfilled Sunday brunches, sat Irene, shoulders square but still hands folded beside the envelope. Its corners were worn soft, the edges frayed. The government seal nearly rubbed smooth. Across from her, Eleanor Hartley cradled a steaming mug that read Navy 93 in blocky letters. She didn't drink it, just held it, both hands wrapped tight. Her coat remained buttoned, her posture straight. Discipline had settled into her bones. "I didn't think it would ever reach you," she said quietly. "It almost didn't." Irene replied. Her voice was huskier than usual, as though memory scratched at her throat. "Got sent to an old P.O. box in Fairbanks. Then D.C. lost in the crash." Eleanor nodded. "The 2010 server purge. They labeled the file Classified Conflict Casualty. Took years to reopen it." Grant sat nearby a respectful distance, thumbing a photo that had come with the envelope. It was grainy black and white, likely scanned from a physical roll of film. In it, Irene, mud-covered, armored face streaked with sweat and ash, was dragging a limp figure across uneven terrain. Behind her, smoke curled into a blurred horizon. "That's from the Harkin Ridge evac," Grant murmured. "I remember that day." "You were unconscious," Irene replied. Grant smiled faintly. "Still remember." Eli had come in earlier, wordless as usual. He'd simply walked to the table, placed a neatly folded blanket next to Irene, and patted her shoulder. Then he left without explanation. No one questioned it. Darlene stood behind the counter now, not working just there. A silent witness, her mouth-tight arms crossed. Her usual sarcasm had drained out sometime between the second page of the letter and the photograph. Eleanor gently set down the mug and reached into her satchel. She unfolded the letter, yellowed and creased, and began reading aloud. Not all of it, just enough. Captain Irene Mallory. This correspondence is to formally invite you to serve as a founding mentor in the Eco Ethics Initiative, established to honor the unseen efforts of off-book units whose contributions remain absent from official archives. Your leadership under fire and commitment to mission integrity represent the values we seek to instill in future cohorts. She paused. It goes on. There's a citation, a file at the Honor Archive in Arlington. They want to acknowledge you. Properly. Irene's eyes didn't move from the letter. She traced the envelope flap with one finger, slow and deliberate. I walked away because that's what Echo 9 did. We ended things before people had to ask why we were there. But you saved people, Eleanor said. You saved me. Wasn't supposed to be about me. There was a moment then, quiet but not empty. The kind of quiet that fills a room when truth is finally allowed to breathe. Grant cleared his throat. I read the citation draft. It's light on details, heavy on sentiment. They always are, Irene said. Sentiment makes people feel safe when they read what they can't fully understand. Eleanor opened a slim folder and slid it across the table. Inside, a printed version of the Honor Archive submission, a blank space where Irene's signature would go, and a title typed in neat font, Recognition of Silent Service. Irene glanced at it, then closed the folder. No, Eleanor looked up. I don't need a citation, Irene said. But keep the file open. Grant smiled slightly. Darlene looked down, blinking faster than usual. Eleanor nodded, pushing the folder back into her satchel. She exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding that breath for 15 years. Grant leaned forward, hands folded. You ever think about teaching again? Irene looked out toward the window where the yellow street lamp glowed over the faded flag outside. Only if they promised to listen. The same bell chimed over the door, but it sounded like a hymn this time, not routine, but reverence. Outside, thin trails of snow clung to the edges of the sidewalk like lace left too long in the wind. The sky had that muted gray of early winter mornings, the kind that made everything feel paused. But inside the old Whistle Cafe, warmth hummed from the old baseboard heater, and the smell of cinnamon toast drifted with intention. A week had passed. Veterans Day banners were packed away, the flags folded neatly, but something lingered in the air, something heavier than decoration. The light through the blinds touched the Formica countertop as if it too had softened its tone. Irene stood behind the register, her apron crisp and sleeves rolled just enough to show the subtle lines of muscle memory in her forearms. The collar pin was gone, tucked away now, but a shadow box near the register held its place. Inside were the silver badge, the photo of her dragging Grant from ash-covered dirt, and an envelope still sealed the citation Eleanor had offered, and she'd declined. Above the display, a handwritten sign read, simply, "Coffee served with quiet honor." The Tuesday crowd hadn't changed, not entirely. Mrs. Pearl still sat near the window pen, hovering above her crossword. Chet slumped in his regular booth, muttering to himself about traffic and pie crust. But the way they looked at Irene had shifted. No longer idle glances or casual greetings. Now there were respectful nods, pauses in conversation when she passed. Morning Captain Chet muttered once, then flushed. "I mean, Irene," she smiled faintly. "Captain's retired. Apron's active duty now." Darlene leaned out of the kitchen window, wiping her hands on her apron. "Hey, boss, order up?" Her voice had lost its sarcasm. It wasn't just teasing anymore. When Irene reached for the plate, Darlene added in a low voice, "Seriously. Proud to follow your lead." Irene carried the order to Eli's corner booth. He was cleaner today, face-shaved, a wool hat folded on the table beside him. As she placed the eggs in front of him, he slid something across the surface, a neatly stitched cloth pale blue with faded threadwork. "Made it myself," he said. "Can't sew worth a damn, but I tried." She unfolded it. The stitches read, "Thank you for the Tuesdays." Irene folded the cloth and pressed it to her chest for a moment before tucking it into her apron pocket. On the chalkboard near the kitchen, she scribbled the day's special in careful block letters, "Irene's Legacy Platter. No price. Pay what you feel." The teen walked in just before Irene's break, young cheeks flushed, a notepad in hand. He hovered near the counter until Darlene gave him a pointed look and jerked her chin toward a booth. I was wondering if you'd answer a few questions," he said once she sat down. "For our school paper." Irene sipped her coffee, her gaze steady. "What about, well, they said you were in Echo." Echo. 9. What does that even mean? She looked out the window for a long moment, watching a dog trot across the crosswalk. "It means," she said slowly, "sometimes you have to speak through silence and trust someone's listening." The teen scribbled quickly, not quite sure what he'd just received, but sensing it mattered. On the jukebox, "Stand By Me" began to play its first chords, weaving through the murmur of conversation. Irene rose from the booth, collected the teen's empty cocoa mug, and stepped behind the counter. That's when the envelope appeared, slid across the formica like a slow tide. She blinked at it, then read the return address, Redwood Hollow High School. Inside was a single page, hand-typed and signed in blue ink. It read, "Veterans Assembly. Next Tuesday. Would you speak? Heroes aren't born in uniform. They're revealed in what they choose to wear afterward and what they choose to do next." The folding chairs creaked under shifting weight as students shuffled in their sneakers, squeaking softly against the polished gym floor. Redwood Hollow High School's auditorium wasn't much to look at, painted cinder-block walls, an aging projector cart with a flickering bulb, and a mural of the Constitution, half hidden by a stack of stacked folding tables. But today, the space felt different. A single wooden podium stood center stage, polished just enough to reflect the overhead lights. Behind it, the screen remained blank. No slideshow, no bullet points. Just the glow of potential. Principal Riley adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and gave the microphone a tap that echoed slightly too loud. "Today," he said, "we have someone who, well, I'll let her speak for herself." Irene walked toward the stage, slowly, her steps steady. She wore her cafe apron over a pressed navy blouse, hair tied back neatly. No badges, no stripes, just the dignity of someone who had nothing to prove. From the back row, Grant watched with his arms crossed, nodding once. Darlene sat near the aisle in a sweater she usually saved for church, her hands folded tight in her lap. Eli, clean-shaven and sitting straighter than usual, gave a small wave that Irene acknowledged with the smallest tilt of her head. At the podium, she didn't fumble with notes. She looked at the crowd, dozens of students, some whispering, some half-listening, a few already leaning in. "I was asked to talk about what it means to serve," she began. "Not just in uniform, but afterward. And I suppose the truth is, most service isn't loud. It doesn't come with medals or speeches or movies made about it." She paused, eyes sweeping the rows. "I served because someone had to. And I stayed quiet because someone had to, too." A murmur moved through the crowd like pages turning in a room full of listeners. "I wasn't special," she continued. "I just kept showing up. That's all service really is. Showing up, listening, being where you're needed, especially when nobody's asking you to be." A student near the front raised her hand. "Did you win any medals?" Irene smiled softly. "The only thing worth earning is someone's trust," she said. "And maybe a decent cup of coffee." Laughter rolled gently through the auditorium. It wasn't the kind that disrupted it, settled everyone deeper into their seats. Another question came. "Were you scared?" "All the time," Irene said. "But fear means you still care. It means the stakes matter." Her voice never rose above conversational. She didn't pace or gesture wildly. She simply stood there and let the weight of quiet years fill the space. When she finished, there was no thunderous applause, just a moment of stillness, and then one by one the students stood. Some walked up just to shake her hand. Others didn't say a word, but looked her in the eye for the first time. One teenager slipped her a folded note which she tucked into her apron without reading right away. By the time the crowd had filtered out and the last chair was folded, Irene stood at the edge of the stage with Grant beside her. "You could have had a whole medal ceremony," he said. She shrugged. This felt louder. They exited into the crisp evening. The town square glowed in the soft orange of dusk. The flag out front swayed slowly, casting long, familiar shadows across the pavement. Back at the Old Whistle Cafe, Irene didn't head to the kitchen. Instead, she walked to her corner booth and sat for the first time, not to take an order or refill a cup, but just to sit. Darlene came over, setting down a plate of warm pie and a fresh mug. "On the house, Captain," she said, her voice thick but smiling. The note from the student peeked out from Irene's pocket. She pulled it open. Scrawled in slightly uneven handwriting were the words, "I want to serve too," not with weapons, with presence. Later that night, the cafe closed early. Irene sat alone for a moment longer, flipping through the yearbook someone had left on her table, a gift from the high school. Her fingers paused over a photo of the Veterans Assembly where a caption read, "Quiet Courage." Behind the register, the shadow box had been updated. Next to the collar badge and sealed citation sat a new plaque. "Respect is given, not asked for." In a quiet town where everyone thought they knew everyone, a woman served coffee with hands that once carried lives through fire. Her story unfolded not through medals or fanfare, but in the warmth of Tuesday mornings and the silence she wore like a second skin. Kindness, when given without expectation, has a way of echoing back louder than any uniform ever could, like the hush before a hymn. It's in the small, unseen moments where true valor quietly waits. And maybe, just maybe, the person pouring your coffee carries more history than you'll ever read on a wall.